But the problem that we have is people don't like to do the research, they don't like to study. And we have to come to a point where if you're so confident in your religion, well then challenge it. Not challenge your creator, because that's kind of ignorant, but I'm saying challenge the information you've been taught. Say, hey, you know, if there was only Adam and Eve, how did Cain find a wife when he got kicked out of the garden? Questions like that. Obviously, there were people on the planet. Why would God tell him that when you go out there, you're going to find a wife and I'll put a mark on your head so that people don't kill you? What people?
Well, these other people that was around were the other sons and daughters of Adam, as mentioned in Genesis chapter 5. You'll see that the scriptures actually implies that Adam and Eve had more offsprings who were reproducing even before this Cain and Abel scenario. And there was a lot more time involved for these offsprings to create a large population of people by the time we read about Cain finding a wife. You see, in Genesis chapter 5, verse 3-5, it says, when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived 930 years, then he died. See, the key verse is Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. These other sons and daughters are the very ones who created the population where Cain was able to find a wife. Now, this can be justified when we realize that during that time, people's lifespans was 8 to 9 centuries long, which you can see when you read the rest of Genesis chapter 5. So we need to realize how much more time probably passed before Cain found a wife. Now, when we look at the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1-3, in verse 3, it says, and in the course of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground in offering to the Lord, just before he killed Cain. We need to pay attention where it says the course of time. That can mean centuries went by before we reached this scenario where Cain killed Abel. This would have left plenty of time for Cain's siblings, the other sons and daughters of Adam, to create a few generations of families and hyperpopulate. Let's say Cain was 4 centuries old when he killed Abel, 400 years old when he killed Abel. And let's say Adam had 20 children within 100 years after Cain was born. There were 300 years for 20 siblings to reproduce up to Cain turning 400 years old. And then within those 300 years that these 20 siblings are having kids, their kids are having kids, well, and their kids are having kids, and they create a population of people up to that point that Cain was able to find a wife. Now, when you consider the fact that everybody lives 9 centuries, people are having children while their great-grandchildren's having children, and they still got 2 or 3 centuries left to reproduce more kids. We got to consider that with the hyperpopulation at that time and how much time they had. Another thing to factor in when it came to the hyperpopulation of people is that there were no problems with reproducing with close family members as it would be today. Because it was the beginning of time, there was no corruption in nature and in creation. So at that time, the human genome was free from any type of mutation. The problem that we would have today in reproducing with close family members would not have been the same for them. You see, in the biblical timeline, you don't see regulations on marrying close kin until you reach the Mosaic period, which was thousands of years after creation. And after the corruption of the DNA, the human DNA, with fallen angels causing genetic mutations before the flood and even after the flood, as the Bible says in Genesis chapter 6. So with all this in context, it no longer becomes a mystery of how Cain found a wife, and it provides a very reasonable explanation in refuting those who spend time fishing for contradictions in the scriptures and thinking that there was a mistake written.